Hello and welcome to Business Standard Views of the Week. How can Make in India for defense production be made economically viable? How should India regulate cryptocurrencies? And what are the few minor reforms that the Modi government is left to make for the banking sector? Subscribe to Business Standard and read this week's top opinion pieces to find out. We start this episode with a thoughtful piece about the state of indigenous production of a crucial piece of defense equipment. Last month, Prime Minister Narendra Modi handed over to the Indian Air Force a light combat helicopter indigenously manufactured by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited to mark the 75th year of independence. However, the Cabinet Committee on Security has been objecting to the LCH on the grounds that its indigenous content is too low for it to qualify as a Made in India product. In his latest column, Ajay Shukla explains why genuinely Indian manufactured defense equipment fails to qualify for indigenous status. He makes a case for the large-scale deployment of the LCH. Finally, he explains why aero engines present the maximum opportunities for indigenization. Turning our focus from what's needed for the defense of our borders, let's look at some of India's most livable cities. The Economist Intelligence Unit has put out its latest global ranking of cities. Ahmedabad figures in the top 10 of the world's cheapest cities list, with battered Damascus and Tripoli for company. In his latest column, TNN points out that in Indian government such rankings, our sprawling metropolises of Delhi and Mumbai rarely rank well, while smaller urban centers such as Indore and Coimbatore beat out the competition. Nanan suggests that planned development of these tier 2 cities holds the key to India's urban development going ahead. But what about rural India, where the bulk of our population lives? Our next piece talks about the consumer sentiment in India's hinterland. Farmers' perceptions regarding their future well-being are obviously linked to the outcome of their agitation, but the numbers tell a different tale. In his latest column, Mahesh Vyas points out that the rural index of consumer sentiments was performing much better 2 weeks before the repeal of the three contentious farm laws than it did in the 2 weeks that ended after the announcement. Obviously, there are more factors at play when quantitatively measuring consumer sentiments. After the government's repeal of the farm laws, farmers' organizations have demanded a legally guaranteed minimum support price or MSP. However, Business Standard explains why this demand will be difficult for the government to accept. The editorial makes the case for an income transfer to farmers as opposed to MSP. The latter could distort the market with inefficient outcomes. Now let's talk about an emerging technology whose future in India hangs in the balance. With the Indian government set to table a bill to regulate cryptocurrencies, there's been a lot of speculation about the contents of this bill. Making the case against a restrictive regulation for cryptocurrencies, KP Krishnan writes that exerting restrictive control on the financial sector comes at the risk of stifling benign innovation, which could carry the waste of lost opportunities downstream. Pointing out that neither SEBI nor RBI is specifically empowered to deal with cryptocurrency, Krishnan asks whether India should look at setting up a unified financial agency, which would implement consumer protection law and microprudential law for all financial firms other than banking and payments. Clearly, developing the regulatory capacity to understand and monitor cryptocurrency is crucial for consumer protection as well as preserving the incentive for innovation. One sector where the government appears to be on the right path in terms of regulation is banking. In a recent address to senior bankers, Prime Minister Modi encouraged banks to lend more to startups as well as big-ticket infrastructure projects. In his open letter to PM Modi, Tamal Bandyopadhyay acknowledges that the government has brought in transparency in the appointment process of CEOs, capitalized banks, cleaned their books, and consolidated a few of them to create scale. However, Bandyopadhyay lays out a few key measures that the government could take to further inspire confidence in the banking sector to encourage them to lend. He suggests setting up a high-level task force to lay down the processes of scrutinizing those lending decisions that go wrong. For vigilance-related issues in banks, Bandyopadhyay suggests taking public sector banks out of the purview of investigative agencies and setting up a new body like an ombudsman. Now let's look at a novel mode of corporate governance in the family-owned enterprises that dominate Indian business. There are reports that some corporate groups such as Reliance and Chennai-based Shriram Group are attempting succession planning by setting up management trusts. Their motives for doing so are driven by the need to ensure smooth succession and avoid the family feuds that accompany the passing of the founder promoter. However, Business Standard asks if family-owned trusts can indeed preclude succession disputes. The editorial points out that such trusts create an additional layer of opacity between ownership and management. Finally, the success of such trusts largely depends on the inclination of the family members to respect the system put in place. The fact is that there is no magic bullet to wean India's conglomerates from the family way unless they consciously choose to do so. Moving on, we bring this episode of BS Views to a close with a reality check about the very alluring world of entrepreneurship. Startups, by virtue of definition, are about freedom from the drudgery of reporting to a boss and not having to follow office or work from home protocols. However, in her latest column, Nivedita Mukherjee explains why the truth about India's startup world can be a lot different. She cites the example of former Housing.com CEO Rahul Yadav, who, after having a face-off with the company's investors, was fired from his position through a public statement. Yadav had co-founded Housing.com along with 11 of his batchmates. Another example is Sachin Bansal's exit from Flipkart because of certain decisions at the company that didn't appeal to investor Tiger Global. Mukherjee sums up the column with the assertion that it's one thing to be a startup founder and quite another to be one's own boss.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.